For as long as Stephen could remember, his life had been devoted to ministry. At 50 years old, Pastor Stephen was well known in his Georgia community, a man of strong faith who had preached from the pulpit for decades. He had led countless prayer meetings, baptized generations, and stood by grieving families at funerals. Yet lately, a gnawing emptiness had settled deep in his soul. Despite his years of service, he couldn't shake the haunting feeling that something was missing, as if his connection to God had grown distant. He prayed. He read scripture. But still, his heart felt cold. At night he woke up drenched in sweat from dreams too dark to speak of, visions of being dragged into a vast darkness while disembodied voices whispered, "You're not ready." Those dreams left him shaken, but he kept silent, too proud to admit the growing fear clawing at his faith. Then came the night that would change everything. Stephen was sitting alone in his study, his Bible open, though he wasn't reading a word. A strange stillness filled the room, heavier than the humid Georgia air outside. And then, clear as day, he felt it. Not heard, but felt. A voice thundered inside his chest, rattling his bones. "Fast, or perish." The words chilled him to the marrow. He sat frozen, heart pounding so loud he swore the neighbors could hear it. Who had spoken? Was it God? Or was it something darker, toying with his weary soul? Shaking, Stephen dropped to his knees, sobbing into his hands, feeling a terror he hadn't known since childhood. The next morning, that same heavy presence lingered. He tried to brush it off as a dream, but deep down, he knew better. The warning had been real. Something, or someone, was calling him. He remembered the old preachers talking about the power of fasting, how it broke chains, summoned heaven's power, and sent demons fleeing. But it had always felt like a relic of the past, something ancient Christians did, not modern-day pastors with mortgages, iPhones, and packed Sunday services. Still, the warning echoed in his soul. He couldn't ignore it. Stephen made the decision that morning, sitting at his worn oak desk, staring out at the sprawling Georgia fields that seemed endless. He would fast. Not for a day or two, but a full 40 days. Water only. The thought sent a shiver through him. Could a man his age survive it? Could he preach? Could he stand? But there was no turning back now. Deep down, he knew. This was a divine summons. A line had been drawn in the sand. As he prepared for the fast, a sense of dread crept into every corner of his home. Shadows seemed darker. The nights grew colder, even in Georgia's balmy fall. At times, Stephen swore he heard whispers in the dark, mocking voices, taunting him. The nightmares returned, worse than before. He dreamt of his congregation standing in the pews, eyes glazed over, as dark figures lurked behind them, grinning. He woke, gasping, heart racing, unable to shake the fear that something evil was watching. Still, he pressed on. He couldn't explain why, but deep down, Stephen knew. This fast wasn't just for him. It was a battle for his church, his family, and his very soul. Something was coming. Something no one could see. And he was being called to stand in the gap. And so, on the first day of his fast, Stephen knelt by his bedside, voice trembling, and whispered into the silent room, "Lord, I'm ready, if it costs me everything." Stephen's fast began quietly, with little fanfare. There was no dramatic announcement from the pulpit, no social media post about his sacrifice. He simply disappeared from the church office, asking his associate pastor to handle Sunday sermons for a few weeks. The congregation assumed their beloved pastor was taking time off, a well-earned rest. Only Stephen knew the truth. This wasn't a vacation. This was war. By the third day, the headaches started. Sharp, piercing pain that felt like nails driven into his skull. His stomach growled so loudly it echoed through the old farmhouse. The smell of coffee from the kitchen made him nauseous. He could almost hear the enemy laughing, taunting him to quit. But he pressed on, clutching his Bible, whispering prayers through chattering teeth. By day 7, something shifted. The physical hunger was still there, gnawing at his insides, but a strange calm settled over him, like the eye of a storm. That night, while kneeling by his bed, Stephen felt the room grow unnaturally cold. The air thickened, like he was breathing through wet cotton. And then it came. A shadow darker than the night itself, slithering into the room, filling every corner with an oppressive weight. Stephen couldn't move. He couldn't speak. All he could do was watch as the darkness took shape, long, clawed fingers, hollow eyes, a grin that seemed carved from bone. "Give up," it hissed, the sound like wind through a graveyard. "This is foolishness. You will die, and no one will remember your sacrifice." Terror gripped Stephen's heart like a vice. For a moment, he wanted to quit, to stumble into the kitchen, grab whatever food he could find, and end it all. But somewhere deep inside, a spark flickered, weak but steady. He forced his trembling lips to move. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want." The creature shrieked, a sound so unearthly it rattled the windows. In an instant the darkness was gone, leaving Stephen gasping for air, drenched in sweat, but alive. That night, he understood. This fast wasn't just about food. He was trespassing on enemy ground, and the enemy was furious. By day 10, Stephen's body grew weaker, but his spirit burned brighter. He stopped caring about food, about comfort, about the world. All he wanted was God. During his prayers he saw flashes, eerie visions that made his skin crawl. His church, once full of light, now sat cloaked in shadows. Demonic figures hovered over the pews, whispering lies into the ears of his congregation. "You're fine. You're saved. There's no need to change." He saw his flock nodding, smiling, oblivious to the spiritual chains tightening around them. But then, another vision. A thread of gold stretching from his own chest, reaching up into the heavens. It pulsed with light, growing stronger each time Stephen whispered, "Your will be done, Lord." And then he saw others, thin, flickering threads connecting to a few members of his church. The quiet widow who prayed daily, the young single mother fighting for her son's soul, the old war veteran who read his Bible by candlelight each night. Their threads joined his, creating a small but mighty cord that shimmered against the darkness. Stephen wept. For the first time he saw the truth. Fasting wasn't a punishment. It was a weapon, a lifeline. And right now, his church, his family, was dangling over a pit they couldn't even see. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about all of them. On day 14, Stephen could barely stand. His body was frail, his clothes hung loose, but his eyes burned with a holy fire. "I see now, Lord," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "They don't even know they're in danger. But I won't stop. I'll fight. For every last soul." Outside, the Georgia sky turned crimson as the sun set. A warning, or perhaps a promise. Something was coming, and Stephen knew. This was only the beginning. By the 15th day of his fast, Stephen felt like a ghost wandering the halls of his own home. The once familiar creaks of the old wooden floors now echoed like distant memories, and the ticking of the clock on the wall became a reminder that time was slipping through his fingers. His body had grown frail, bones pressing against skin, lips dry and cracked. But his soul was wide awake, sharper than it had ever been. Something was changing, not just in him, but in the very air around him. He could feel it. A storm was coming. It was that night, as the Georgia sky bled orange and purple over the horizon, that Stephen's journey took a terrifying turn. He sat on his back porch, staring at the old oak tree his father had planted decades ago. Its gnarled branches twisted against the sky like skeletal hands reaching for something just out of grasp. The wind howled low, whispering through the leaves, carrying a voice Stephen could almost understand. "Stop. Turn back. It's not too late." A chill ran down his spine. He shook his head, gripping his Bible tighter. "No," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I've come too far." But the air grew heavier, the sky darkened unnaturally fast, and before he could move, the shadows crept in around him. They didn't come from the sky or the ground, but from the very corners of his mind. Regrets, failures, moments of weakness replaying like a cruel slideshow. The time he ignored a grieving widow at church. The sermon he softened to avoid offending. His strained relationship with his daughter who hadn't spoken to him in years. Stephen fell to his knees, trembling. "Lord, why are you showing me this?" he cried out. But no answer came. Only the suffocating weight of shame. He realized in that moment, this was the true battle, not hunger, not weakness, but facing the parts of himself he had buried for so long. Suddenly the ground seemed to split beneath him. Whether it was real or a vision, he couldn't tell. One side was blinding light, peaceful and inviting. The other, darkness so complete it seemed to swallow the world whole. And in that chasm, Stephen saw them. Souls, countless souls, reaching up with empty, hollow eyes. Their mouths opened in silent screams. Men, women, even children. Faces he recognized from his congregation. People he had prayed with, laughed with, comforted. They were all there. Lost. His heart shattered. "No, no, Lord, please," he sobbed, crawling toward the edge. But he couldn't reach them. A voice thundered through the sky, shaking the earth itself. "Stephen, you see what they do not. They believe they have time. But the hour is late, and the enemy is already among them." Tears poured down his face as he realized the truth. His fast had pierced the veil, pulled back the curtain hiding the spiritual war raging just beyond sight. This wasn't just about him or his church. This was about eternity. Then, from the shadows, he saw the enemy. Not as a red-horned beast, but something far more terrifying. A handsome figure, dressed in a preacher's suit, smiling, charming, twisting the word of God like a snake coiling around its prey. "They don't need to change," the figure whispered. "They're good people. They give to the church. They show up on Sundays. Isn't that enough?" Stephen's blood ran cold. He saw how easily his flock had been deceived, lulled into spiritual sleep by comfort and routine. And he knew then why his fast had been so hard, why the attacks came night after night. The enemy wasn't after his body. He was after his soul, after the souls of every person Stephen had ever cared for. Mustering every ounce of strength, Stephen stood. "No more," he growled, voice steady despite the trembling of his frame. "You won't have them. Not while I still breathe." Light burst from his chest, that same golden thread from before, now thick, glowing, unbreakable. It shot upward, piercing the darkness, connecting him directly to heaven. And then he heard it. A voice, soft, but filled with power. "Well done, my servant. You see now. Fasting isn't just a sacrifice. It's a weapon. You fight not against flesh and blood, but powers unseen. Stand firm." Stephen collapsed to the ground, sobbing. Not from fear, but from the overwhelming love he felt pouring from heaven itself. He wasn't alone. He never had been. The fast had broken the veil, revealed the truth. This world was a battlefield, and too many souls were walking straight into the enemy's snare. As the first light of dawn broke, Stephen knew his mission was clear. He would go back to that pulpit. He would preach like a dying man to dying men, warning them that Sunday religion wouldn't save them. Rituals wouldn't protect them. Only a true surrender, only seeking the face of God, only picking up the weapons of prayer and fasting could break the chains that held them. Because now, Stephen knew, time was running out. Stephen returned home after that terrifying, soul-shaking vision, a different man. The golden light that had surged from his chest still burned in his memory, but the faces of those lost souls haunted him even more. For days, he barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he could hear their cries, the same people he'd preached to for years, reaching out from the shadows, begging for one more chance. It wasn't just a nightmare. It was a warning. And Stephen knew he couldn't waste another second. With trembling hands, he pulled his old Bible off the shelf, the one his father had passed down to him, the leather cracked from decades of use. He opened it, not to prepare a sermon, but to beg God for direction. Lord, show me how to fight. I've seen the enemy, I've seen the souls slipping away, and I won't stand by anymore. For hours, he sat in that chair by the window, staring out at the same old oak tree, now forever tied to the night his world changed. The fall wind rattled the windows, sending leaves spinning through the air like restless spirits. The sky above turned gray, heavy with an eerie stillness that made his skin crawl. Something was coming. He could feel it. Then, as if on cue, the church bell rang out from down the street. But instead of its usual comforting chime, it echoed like a funeral toll, each clang shaking Stephen's core. "It's time," he whispered. "The battle's already here." Without another thought, Stephen called a meeting with his congregation. He'd preached to these folks for over 20 years, men and women who had watched him grow old, watched his children leave for the city, and stayed faithfully in those worn wooden pews every Sunday. But what he was about to tell them wasn't another sermon. It was a warning. That evening, the small country church filled slowly, the familiar smell of pine cleaner and hymn books filling the air. Some came out of loyalty, others out of curiosity. Rumors had already started spreading about Stephen's strange behavior. But when he stepped up to the pulpit, there was no hesitation in his voice. His once weak frame now carried a quiet strength. "I've seen what waits for us if we don't wake up," he began, his voice steady, breaking through the uneasy whispers. "The enemy isn't coming. He's already here. And he doesn't come with horns or a pitchfork. No. He comes dressed like us, speaking half-truths, convincing good people they're safe because they show up here on Sundays." Gasps echoed through the room. A few heads shook, others bowed low. Stephen pressed on. He told them everything. The vision of the souls lost in the shadows, false preacher dressed as one of their own, the power he'd seen unleashed through fasting and true repentance. "It ain't enough to just sit here every Sunday and nod along. We've been sleepwalking, folks, myself included. But now I know the truth. Fasting isn't just some ancient practice. It's our weapon. It's what breaks the chains we can't even see. If we don't start fighting back, if we don't start praying and fasting, we're handing our children, our grandchildren, over to the darkness." Silence fell. Some wept. Others stared ahead, pale as ghosts. It was more than a sermon. It was a call to arms. By the time Stephen finished, the sky outside had darkened completely. The old church stood quiet, but something had shifted. For the first time in years, people didn't rush to leave. They stayed, gathering in small circles, hands trembling as they prayed together, some for the first time in their lives. Stephen knew this was just the beginning. The war had started, and now, at least, his people were ready to fight. The days that followed were unlike anything Stephen had ever experienced in his decades as a pastor. Word of his message spread like wildfire through the small Texas town. Some folks called him crazy, Others called him brave. But those who were there that night, they couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. They had heard it in his voice, the trembling honesty, the terrifying certainty. And deep down, they knew he was right. They'd been sleepwalking through their faith, going through the motions while the world outside grew darker by the day. Stephen felt it too, an eerie heaviness that settled over him like a thick fog. The nights were the worst. He'd wake up drenched in sweat, gasping for air as if unseen hands were pressing down on his chest. Shadows seemed to crawl along the walls, and every creak of the old farmhouse sounded like a whisper from the other side. His wife, Martha, worried he was losing his mind. "Stephen, maybe you're pushing yourself too hard," she'd say, laying a trembling hand on his arm. But Stephen knew better. This wasn't stress. It was spiritual. Something unseen was fighting back. One evening, after another restless night, Stephen sat alone at the church, the only light coming from a flickering candle at the altar. He opened his Bible, searching for comfort. But instead, his eyes landed on Isaiah 58, the true fast God desires. The words leapt off the page. "Is not this the kind of fasting I have chosen, to loose the chains of injustice, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke?" Tears welled in his eyes. "Lord," he whispered, "I hear you. But how do I lead these people when I feel like I'm drowning?" Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the church, snuffing out the candle. The shadows grew long, and for a moment, Stephen felt utterly alone. But then, from the darkness, he sensed a presence, not of fear, but of power. A soft voice, not audible but felt deep in his soul, spoke. "You are not alone, but you must go deeper. Lead them into the fast, the real fast." The next morning, Stephen stood before his congregation, his voice steady but his face pale. "I know some of you think I've lost my mind," he began. "But I need you to hear me. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about all of us. The enemy's already here. In our homes, in our schools, even in our churches. He's got our children, our grandchildren. And we're too comfortable to see it. But we've been given a weapon. Not our fists, not our politics. Fasting, prayer. It's the only way we win this fight." Murmurs rippled through the pews. Some folks nodded, others shook their heads. But Stephen pressed on, his voice rising like thunder. "Starting this Sunday, we fast. 1 week. No fancy meals, no TV, no distractions. Just prayer, fasting, and crying out to God. If we're going to break these chains, it starts now." The reaction was mixed. Some stormed out, muttering that he'd lost his mind. Others sat frozen, staring at the worn wooden cross above the pulpit. But a handful of them, the ones who'd felt the darkness creeping in, they stayed. They gathered around Stephen, tears streaming down their faces. "We're with you, Pastor. We've been feeling it too. We just didn't know what to do." That night, the church doors stayed open. Folks came and went, some bringing their grandkids, others kneeling alone in the back pews. They fasted, they prayed, and slowly something started to shift. The air grew lighter. The oppressive weight that had hung over them for so long began to lift. But with every prayer, every tear, Stephen could feel the enemy pushing back harder. Strange things began happening. Animals howling in the night, electronics flickering, people waking from nightmares they couldn't explain. Yet through it all, Stephen stood firm. "This is what war feels like," he told them. "But don't you dare turn back now." For the first time in years, the church was alive, not with potlucks or bake sales, but with raw, desperate faith. They weren't just playing church anymore. They were fighting for their souls, and the souls of everyone they loved. And Stephen knew, deep in his bones, that this was just the beginning. The real battle was still ahead. The following days tested Stephen's faith like never before. As the week-long fast began, a strange, unsettling heaviness settled over the entire town. Folks couldn't quite explain it, but they felt it. A creeping unease, like a storm gathering just beyond the horizon. Even seasoned farmers, men who'd spent their whole lives watching the skies, said it felt like a harvest moon rising. But something dark lingered in the air. Stephen, too, felt the weight pressing down. He woke each morning with his chest tight, the air in his lungs cold as ice. Yet he pushed through, knowing that what they were facing wasn't of this world. It was spiritual, a battle that couldn't be fought with shotguns or shovels, but with prayer, fasting, and unwavering faith. As word spread, more people joined the fast. It wasn't just the church folks anymore. It was their children, their neighbors, even a few who hadn't set foot in church for years. They all felt it. Something was happening. Something they couldn't see but could feel deep in their bones. The town grew quiet. No laughter at the diner, no country music spilling out of trucks. Instead, there was a hush, like the whole world was holding its breath. But with every passing day, the darkness pushed back harder. The nights became colder, the winds howled louder. Animals growled and clawed at doors. Some townsfolk spoke of waking up at exactly 3 a.m., drenched in sweat, hearing whispers they couldn't explain. Lights flickered, radios crackled with static. It was as if something unseen had been stirred, angry at being challenged. Some faltered, giving in to fear, breaking their fasts and staying home. Others grew desperate, begging Stephen to stop before someone got hurt. Yet Stephen stood his ground. "We've come too far," he told them, his voice firm but full of compassion. "This isn't just about us anymore. It's about breaking the chains holding this town. Our children, our grandchildren. We finish what we started." And somehow, they found strength. Each night they gathered at the church, the old wooden pews creaking under the weight of generations crying out to God. There were no fancy sermons, no music, just raw, desperate prayers rising like smoke. Then, something changed. On the 6th night, as the clock struck midnight, a stillness settled. The wind died, the air warmed, and for the first time in days, peace washed over them. Tears flowed freely as Stephen lifted his hands, his voice breaking. "Do you feel that? That's the Lord. We're not alone." It wasn't over, but in that moment, they knew they had struck a blow against the darkness. And as the sun rose over that Texas town, brighter than it had in years, they realized they had done something few dared to do. They had fought back, together. By the time the 7th and final day of the fast arrived, Stephen could feel it deep in his soul. Something had shifted. The air over the little Texas town felt different, as if the heavens themselves had opened, waiting to see how it would all end. Families that had once fallen apart were now gathering on front porches, hands held tight, whispering prayers they'd nearly forgotten. Even the toughest men, the ranchers and oil hands, who hadn't darkened a church door in decades, showed up that morning, hats in hand, eyes red, knowing they were part of something far bigger than themselves. Stephen stood at the front of the old wooden church, the sun pouring through the stained glass in golden streams that felt almost holy. He looked out over the crowd, every pew filled, folks standing shoulder to shoulder, young and old, black and white, every wall between them stripped away by 7 days of shared suffering, shared hope. There wasn't a dry eye in the place. "You've felt it, haven't you?" Stephen's voice cracked as he spoke. "You've seen it. The darkness, the fear. But you stood firm. And I'm here to tell you, the Lord saw it too." The church was silent, not a baby's cry, not a cough, as Stephen stepped forward. What he said next sent chills down their spines. Last night, while y'all were praying, I saw it." His voice trembled. "I saw heaven open, and I saw the other side too. The battlefield we've been fighting on all week. Demons, real as you and me, clawing to get to us, furious we dared to stand. But I saw angels too, mighty warriors standing between us and the pit. And they weren't there because of me. They were there because of y'all. Because your prayers, your fasting, it reached heaven." Gasps filled the room as Stephen continued, his hands gripping the pulpit. "I saw chains breaking, folks. Chains that have bound this town for generations. Addiction, hatred, hopelessness. They broke. Because we finally stopped fighting with our fists and fought with our faith. It was then the doors of the church creaked open, sunlight spilling in. An old man stepped forward, his face worn with years of bitterness. 'Preacher,' he croaked, 'I need to be saved. I need what you're talking about.' A hush fell over the crowd as that man, once the town drunk, fell to his knees. In that moment, others followed, men, women, teenagers, all stepping forward, some sobbing, some silent, but every one of them ready to lay down their burdens. Stephen's voice rang out, strong now. 'This is why Jesus sent me back. Not just to tell you what's coming, but to tell you what's possible. Revival ain't just something from the history books. It's here. Right here. And it started with fasting. With surrender. That day, as the Texas sun climbed high into the sky, something truly miraculous happened. It wasn't flashy. There weren't tongues of fire or mighty winds. No, it was something quieter, deeper. Hearts softened. Old grudges died. Families forgave. And for the first time in years, the little town felt light again, free from the shadows that had haunted it for so long. Stephen knew his journey wasn't over. There'd be more battles, more darkness to face. But as he stood before his people, watching them embrace one another, he felt peace. They were ready now. And somewhere deep in his spirit, Stephen heard that still, small voice. "Well done, my good and faithful servant." As the crowd gathered to pray, Pastor Stephen's thoughts turned to the world beyond his small town. He knew the message of revival, of breaking chains, needed to reach further, to inspire others to pick up the weapons of prayer and fasting. That's why he decided to take the next step, to share the story of his journey with a wider audience. If you've been touched by this story and want to hear more messages of hope, faith, and revival, I invite you to subscribe to my YouTube channel. There you'll find powerful teachings, inspiring stories, and moments of reflection to fuel your own journey of faith. Together, we can continue this mission, awaken more hearts, and fight the good fight. Don't miss out on what's next. Subscribe today and be part of the movement. Thank you for your support, and remember, the best is yet to come.